Hello, and welcome back to another Blender tutorial from One Luck Studios. My name is Jared Weber, and today I'm going to be showing you guys the Disney shader that I have created to replicate the Disney's shader that's in like RenderMan and that Disney uses in-house. If you want to get this shader, it's been uploaded to the One Lux website. You can get it at www.onelux.com/ubershaderbeta. And this shader basically allows you to create essentially any material you want. So that ranges from non-metals called dielectrics, metals, that includes metals with anisotropy, car paint with like a clear coat on top of it, glass and refractive materials, skin, subsurface scattering type materials like milk and apples and grapes and such, emission type materials, and nature type materials such as like your wood and bark and such. So it is a beta test for a larger add-on that is coming out. It's a Blender material add-on. I haven't named it yet. I haven't really. It's not done. But this is the beta test of one of the parts of that add-on. So it is a paid add-on, so it will be for sale in the Blender market. But if you download this shader and you decide to help test it out, you'll get 50% off for the full price of the add-on. So to download said shader, you just go to the website I mentioned before and click this download shader button, fill out this little form, and click the Get Shader button here, and you'll be given a download link so you can download the shader and play around with it. So with all of that being said, I think it's time to go ahead and pop this bad boy open and see what it can do. So let me load up the file real quick. So this is the Disney shader. This has most of the functions that the Disney shader has, from what I could tell from just looking online and doing some research and such. The great thing about this shader, however, is that it has some extendability to it in the form of PBR texturing. What that means is that you can add textures in from, say, Substance Designer or any other texturing application and use those textures to drive your reflections and basically the overall look of your material. I built this shader using some of Cinecat Pro's custom node group setups. So he has node group setups for dielectric materials, refraction materials, metallic materials, etc. And a custom Fresnel node that essentially calculates Fresnel correctly. The Blender Fresnel node doesn't do it right, and you have to do some hackish sort of things to get physically accurate fall off curves and reflection values and such. And so Cinecat Pro basically went and hacked away at some math on it and made it into this awesome physically accurate Fresnel node. So this shader basically uses some of those shaders and builds on them and gives you one Uber shader that works for essentially every material you could think of making. So just to get started, I'm going to turn on the rendered view. And what you're going to see is a completely black material. So just turn the samples up real quick. Yeah, so the material is completely black, and that's because nothing on the shader is turned on currently. So when you start looking at your shader here, you can pop it open if you're curious and look inside. There is all of this crazy node noodling here going on, and yeah, it's there's a lot of this. So I would recommend not touching this. If you like move a node around or like disconnect a couple connections, that sort of thing, and like try to do your own thing, you may break it. And honestly, that's fine if that's what you're trying to do. If you're trying to test it out and really dig deep into it and you know what you're doing, feel free. I mean, I'm providing this for you guys so you can, have fun and give me feedback on how to make it better and that sort of thing. So feel free to crack it open and do what you will with it. However, I will say that if you unplug one connection in the wrong spot, your shader is broken. So just keep that in mind. I'll tab back open so I can give you a little explanation of what's going on. So these are those nodes I was talking about that Cinecat Pro created. So this is that dielectric node, the metallic node here, reflection node. And if I pop open this reflection node, you'll see that there's this custom Fresnel group in here. And this is all of the lovely math things that he did to it. So that's straight from him. And shouts to Cinecat for being a genius and all, cynical. Regardless, so let's start shading and making this work. So to give you a brief breakdown, these outputs up here, so color, IOR, roughness, specular, and normal, are all global values, meaning you can input like a diffuse map into this color input, a roughness map into this roughness input, and a spec map into the specular input, normal map for the normal input, etc. And they will take effect for all of the materials within, all of the shader types within the shader tree. So very, very powerful system. It allows you to really use some PBR texturing workflows and get the material to look exactly what you want, exactly like you want, without having to go through too much effort of making sure you're plugging the right nodes in and such. So there's that. Like I said, those are global values. The one I forgot to mention is metallic rim color. This adds some rim shading, and I'll show you that in a second, for the metallic shader here. So it'll only work if you have metallic shading on. It will not work if you have dielectric or refraction or whatever else on. This metallic rim color won't do anything. So just keep that in mind. Last thing before we start shading, all of these sliders here in the middle are your control. So anything with the bracket basically is a type of shading that you're going to be using. You can combine them to a limited extent, and I'll give you some more detail on that. But essentially, they're mapped between the sliders are mapped between value of 0 and 1. So having it at 0 means it's off. So as you can see, dielectric all the way down through clear coat, all of the materials currently, all the shaders are off. If I turn dielectric on by entering 1, now we have a dielectric material. So these values are mapped and rounded. So if I have it at 0.68, it is no different than if I have it at 1. If I have it at 0.5, it is no different than if I have it at 1, set to a value of 1. But if I have it at 0.499999, there we go. If I have it at 0.499, then it gets rounded down to 0. So any value below 0.5 gets rounded down to 0, and any value above 0.5 or 0.5 or above gets rounded up to 1. So 0 is off, 1 is on. So the easiest way to work this is just to, if you don't want that type of shading, if you don't want to use that type of shading, just leave the value at 0. If you do want that type of shading, leave the value at 1. Very, very simple. Now, the way the controls work, so this specular value here is used to control glossiness. So at the moment, it's completely off. So it's not affecting anything. This specular value will not affect metallics, and it will not affect the anisotropy settings, but it will affect everything else. So just know that if you're looking to get specular highlights in your materials and you're like, where's my reflection and such at? It's in this specular value node here. It does not work with metallic and anisotropy because that is hard coded into those two groups. So if I load up a metallic node, you'll see this is the metallic node that's inside the shader, and there's no specular input here at all. But if I load up a dielectric material, you'll see specular input. So specular does not work for metallic and anisotropy. If I turn specular up to, say, 0.5, now we have those lovely reflections that we all know and love so much. You can also control roughness. So if I set this to 0.2, our surface is becoming a little bit rougher, and we're getting a little bit of like a plasticky, very shiny, rough kind of plasticky metal, or that's not even a thing, plasticky sort of thing, I should say. And yeah, that's essentially how you control what you're doing. It's a very, very simple setup. So if I want to switch shading, I can switch from dielectric by turning it to 0 and go straight to metallic. Yay, now I have a metallic shader. Turn the roughness up to say 0.3, and then that's it. I now have a metal. Now a lot of y'all are probably interested in wanting to make like car paint or something like that, and that's why I've added this clear coat option, which just basically adds a reflection shader right on top. So this metallic shader here is getting piped into this reflection shader group node, and it's adding reflection on top of it. So if you have a metallic shader and you want to make car paint, turn on clear coat. Set clear coat to 1. You won't see anything at the start, and that's due to two things. One, your roughness value is probably too high, so turn your roughness value down to like 0.05 to start, and now you'll start seeing your clear coat on top. I'm gonna turn it on a little bit lower actually, and then you can also use the specular value to control the clear coat option as well. So if you want more specular highlights, if you want it to be more of a mirror-like reflection, if you're going for something like chrome, right? Like a chrome wrap paint around your car, you can turn specular up a little bit higher. Turn it up to say 0.5 or all the way up to 1 to basically a chrome material. So lots of options there. The next slider is refraction. So turning on refraction gives you a refractive material. For it to work, make sure your color up here, the value is set to like 0.98. It's set relatively high, so you'll get an actual, it'll work correctly. On top of that, you can also add some specularity to it to give it like a shininess on the outside, and use the roughness control as well to make it rougher or smoother. Give it those micro displacements that makes everything look good and such. So as you can see, this is the same exact setup as adding in, a refraction shader and then plugging it into your material output or mixing it with something and then plugging up all your inputs here to textures and such, or using procedural textures or color ramps, whatever. It's the same exact setup as that, except you have one node that takes all of those texture inputs, and you can immediately pick which type of shading you want to use. Very, very, very powerful. So I'm going to turn metallic back on and show you guys anisotropy. So for this to work, metallic has to be set to 1, and anisotropy has to be set to 1 as well. And let's turn up the roughness. It won't work if it's perfectly smooth. So bump up the roughness just a little bit, and now you'll start to see that anisotropic blurring of your reflection. You can turn up the anisotropy amount. Those controls are here. So you can turn it up to say like 0.9, and you get a much sharper anisotropic material. You can also rotate it by using the anisotropy rotation button here as well. So that's anisotropy. The great thing about it is that it is physically based anisotropy. This anisotropy shader that's built into Blender is not physically accurate, and by that I mean it does not accurately calculate Fresnel values. So it is having those same sorts of calculations being done to it that we're doing for the metallic shader or the dielectric shader or the refraction shader. So you're getting real anisotropy. It's going to look great every time, especially if you have textures loaded in here. Alrighty, now moving on, we're going to turn on subsurface scattering. My computer is going to chug. Hopefully the audio doesn't desync too much. But yeah, so this is subsurface scattering. I can change the color of subsurface scattering down here. These are all the controls for it. So SS color, radius color, the radius size, the scale of the subsurface scattering, and then you can add in a texture blur if you'd like to kind of blur the transition from one color to the other between or inside of your object. So set SS color, say to here. I can set the radius color to like this bluish, and I may turn the SS color a little bit back, a little bit more towards green. Yeah, I'm starting to like that. It looks good. Okay, and on top of that, you also have a reflective option for your subsurface scattering. So for this to work, I'm going to turn roughness all the way off because we don't really necessarily need it yet. And then I'm going to use the subsurface scattering reflection shader on top of it. So to make that work, all you got to do is activate it by pressing 1. So now it's on. And there's a little bit of it happening. I don't know if you guys can see it very well. Let me see here. I got that render border on. Let me make this render border a little bit smaller so computer doesn't die. So there's a little bit of it happening here. You can see that black line on top. That's that reflection Fresnel line, but there's no specular highlights. That's why it's showing up black. So we turn on specular a little bit and bump it up some. Now you'll start to see those specular highlights in here. This reflection here is more accurate. Yeah, it's great. So that's just an easy way to add a reflective material, a reflective shader right on top of your subsurface scattering. It starts to break a little bit once it gets up to like 0.5. It's basically fully reflective at that point. So you'll want to keep this value relatively low. But right at about 0.3, you're really getting a strong reflection on top. Oh, and I still have clear coat on. I am sorry. Let me turn that off. Let me see if it still breaks. Yeah, it still breaks, and that's something that needs to be fixed and worked on. But as I said, this is a beta. You know, working out the kinks of a Disney shader in Blender. This could be a great thing. So, yeah, and that is basically it. There is an emission shader as well, so you can turn that on and get emission. The strength for that emission is down here, so I could turn that like to 2.2, use a light texture for it. I could also plug a texture into this color map, or into this color node here, and use that as a light texture, kind of like Gleb likes to do. That's the shader. That's everything. The only one I think I missed was this anisotropy tangent, so you can add an anisotropic tangent map in. And yeah, so you got all your shaders here. You got your options towards the bottom down here, from anisotropy amount down to emission strength. And you have your global properties from color down to normal. So this is where these inputs up here, except for IOR, are where your texture maps are going to go. Also, this IOR value, I honestly shouldn't have exposed it, and I may go back and change that, but just to give you guys some more control, like I actually will probably leave it, but you shouldn't change it. 1.45 is about the average for most materials. So for most dielectric materials and most metals, 1.45 is about the average. I'm referencing a Cinecat Pro video on that as well. I'll have to go back and check to be 100% sure, but that's, from what I remember, that's how it goes. So I mean, changing it to, say, like 1.5 or 1.55, that's pretty common. But anywhere outside of that range, you're starting to break the laws of energy conservation and are basically ruining the physically accurate shading part of this. And I think that's going to do it. So this is the One Lux Disney Surface Uber Shader beta node. Yeah, that's a mouthful. But as I said, this is part of this is just one very, very small part of an add-on coming soon. I think you guys are going to like it. It should make your lives very easy in terms of material and texture creation. I mean, I'm hoping to get it to a point where you can open up Blender, have a model that's been sitting around for, a month or two, and within, 20, 30 minutes, have slapped materials and textures on it, and it looks physically accurate and real. So stay tuned for info on that. When you download this shader, you'll get an email message, and by doing that, you are basically signed up to get 50% off of the add-on when it is released. I can promise you it'll be the best value add-on, for time saved. At least in my personal opinion, if the things that are coming are great. So I'm excited to share that with y'all, and stay tuned for news on that. And this is Jared signing out. You guys have a great day, and God bless. All right, guys, I messed up earlier. I failed all of you, and I'm sorry. I did not have this shader working properly. So clear coat wasn't working last time we checked, and that is because I was not A, rounding the value, and B, this little mix value between our clear coat shader and the emission shader, which basically tells it to be black if this FAC is at 0, or it tells it to be this reflection node here, the clear coat shader, if it's at 1. So that little node socket wasn't hooked up to clear coat, and that's why it wasn't working. So to demo this, let's reset everything. I'm going to turn metallic on by setting it to 1. So now we have a metallic shader. Color is set to this purpley thing. Looks nice. And then there's this metallic rim color that changes the color on the outside. I didn't demo that last time either, but that also does some cool things. Can get you some very interesting metal types, right? So we're going to turn the roughness up to 0.5. Now we have a pretty rough looking metal here. And to top it all off and give it that clear coat finish, we're going to turn on clear coat by setting it to 1. There is no change yet. That's because clear coat is not going to be reflective unless you give it a specular value. So we're going to change our specular value and make it to, let's try 0.3 to start. There is your car paint. Fixed. It is now fixed. Works properly. It's been re-uploaded, so if you have the old version, just go re-download it. It's like a 2 megabit file, or yeah, I think it's like 2 megabit file or something like that. So yeah, it's fixed. That was it. Just wanted to make that little quick addendum. Have a good day.